Very many thanks, the distinguished jury and the esteemed audience, for giving us this opportunity to showcase our work, which is on advanced retail store feature-based clustering done for a large multi-brand retailer. A team of three, comprising of myself and two of my esteemed colleagues, did this work as a bit of a heavy lifting, and we're very, very proud of what we really came up with. To understand the depth of our research, I think it will be important and to a certain extent paramount to have a little bit of a preamble precursor setting the context. So we were faced with this intriguing situation where this large multi-brand retailer was having a dismal performance over time, with both their top line and bottom line shrinking pretty monotonically. And they were absolutely clueless about what are those triggers which are causing this dismal business performance. A workshop was organized to dive deep to decipher into the root causes of this non-performance. As part of the analysis, we came out with some very interesting insights which was unfathomable for them, and they couldn't really comprehend that those could be the root causes. And we had to actually establish those through simulation, that they are predominantly the weak links causing the business revivalness. So essentially, we identified an obsolete classification of their store segmentation as the main culprit, and we went about overhauling that obsolete classification with design thinking based strategies that eventually propel the sales, marketing, and merchandising initiatives. This paper brings to the fore the ingenuities that were in play to carve out this overhaul and the interesting insights that we generated, which paved the way for further foundational work. So if I have to summarize for you what can be expected in the remaining part of the presentation, it will look something like this. We established that the historical segmentation process, which involved a one-size-fits-all approach, was not very conducive for implementation of effective sales, marketing, and merchandising strategies that they were trying to adopt, because that sort of a classification was leading to inaction, misleading action, and actions which could lead to disastrous results. Our work involved overcoming this legacy cluster with design thinking based segmentation scheme that took the section specific nuances into consideration, and at that point it was considered preposterous and outrageous. The entire spectrum of store features and attributes were exploited. To carve out the segmentation scheme, attributes were stratified and classified as generic versus specific, and that was the mantra in terms of having a proper recipe for success for the store segmentation. And eventually the right implementation of the uniqueness of the approach and lucid interpretation of the cluster labeling led to swift implementation at ground level, resulting in impactful business selections. So from the standpoint of understanding then what were our final goals, our aim involved converting a business objective into a research objective to develop tailor-made horses for the courses segments, which would incorporate section-centric and section-specific features. It is almost as good as one single store will have multiple membership depending on the section that it will belong to. So from that standpoint, some of the hypotheses were very crucial to be tested. For example, whether there will be an optimal balance between the usage of generic versus specific features for the clustering exercise. If this hypothesis is not answered in the affirmative, then the quality of the design thinking and the design itself will be questionable. Similarly, profile of a store will vary significantly across the different sections was expected to be answered in the affirmative. Design thinking is at the heart of this entire work, and the 5-stage process involving empathy, definition, ideation, prototyping, and testing were all in play in isolation and in conjunction. The solution methodology as an outcome of the design thinking comprised of multiple phases. The 4 notable phases are data integration and exploratory data analysis, which involved segregation of data into multiple sections through data integration and classification of numerical and categorical data into generic and specific features, a very important milestone and target indeed. The second phase involved supervised machine learning at its core, with an ensemble and amalgamation of deep learning to shortlist the variables and the attributes. The natural progression from phase 2 involved unsupervised machine learning, where the clusterings, real segmentation came into play, one for each section, and that is really the USP and the differentiating feature, and it worked out beautifully with multiple methods deployed for determining optimal number of clusters. And finally, proof of the pudding is in the eating. The clusters that were developed were labeled, were characterized, and were made easily comprehensible to be implemented at the grassroots level. So as part of exploratory data analysis, some very interesting insights came through from the point of view of the segregation and stratification of categorical and numerical variables into generic and specific attributes. As an outcome of phase 2, through high degree of intervention of supervised machine learning, the variables were shortlisted to have them decisive as inputs for phase 3, which was about the segmentation exercise in itself, with unsupervised machine learning now coming into play to create as many as 4 clusteral configurations with multiple iterations. Phase 4, the analysis of the clusters, each of the cluster and their labeling and their interpretation and their characterization give rise to nicely curved out cluster configuration for each of the segments, which were easily implementable at the ground level. What were the key conclusions on hypothesis 1? What we really figured out after testing emphatically is that there is an immaculate balance between generic and specific features. Hypothesis 2, regarding related to profiling of a store, whether it will vary significantly across the different sections, were also answered in the affirmative, with benchmarking done with the erstwhile segmentation, making sure that the new classification scheme was indeed the need of the hour. What lies ahead? A very promising and exciting time. We have already started working on new store predictions and evolving decision rules for them as part of linear and nonlinear discriminant analysis. Initial results are very, very promising. We are also augmenting additional data sources like the catchment data, the CRM data, to further enrich and sharpen the segmentation. At a more broad generic level, we feel that our core concept in some way breakthrough in the segmentation world can be easily extendable beyond multi-brand retail and can be implemented at a much broader canvas level for the benefit of the overall industry. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bikramjit. Let me make sure that I'm getting the names right. Dr. Bikramjit, Jaiprakash, and Vijay. Thank you for that interesting presentation, and would love to understand a little bit more of what you've done. Now, basically, the hypothesis that you were exploring came out to be quite valid, isn't it? At the end of the work that you did.
No, absolutely. And a lot.
Dr. Bikramjit can't hear you.
Oh, is it? You can't hear me?
Yeah, go
Am I
ahead. We can
audible
hear you.
now?
Yeah, go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay, great. Yes, indeed, Manish. The hypothesis that we wanted to test was empirically established in the affirmative and a lot hinged on the design thinking. So, in some way, it was a breakthrough approach, highly unconventional, and a wide departure from the standard and the erstwhile way of segmentation of the store. So, yes, so initially, when this was proposed from us as part of our design thinking workshop, it was considered to be a little bit preposterous and outrageous, as I mentioned over there. So almost looked at as sort of a wild thinking, and it is a figment of imagination that this is the way a store can be actually classified into multiple memberships by looking into section-specific attributes. But when the results were available and conclusively established, then of course the reactions and the next steps were very, very different. So yeah, very satisfying experience, Manish.
Yeah, thank you. I think that I like the fact that you're saying hypotheses are emphatically proven right. So I'm assuming that a lot of stats that you talked about, whether it's ANOVA testing and Z score and a lot of other things that I couldn't even understand, obviously have presumably shown you that your hypotheses are emphatically valid, as you pointed out. But I was wondering that how do you see the application of a method like that, going forward? So I would imagine that in the case that you presented to us, you would have the kind of data that you have available at the store level perhaps was quite rich for you to be able to explore that. But if I'm looking at categories where I don't necessarily have that much of a rich data, is that a limitation, or would you sort of need to have a phase where you make sure that you're collecting information on different attributes and different variables extensively before you can progress on something like that?
Yeah, sure. So, of course, the whole thought process was leveraging the information that was available to the fullest, right? And if we take a step back, answering your first part of the question, what are the application or why was this necessitated? So, as I mentioned over there in the video, that the initial problem that was on the surface to the naked eye was a dismal, monotonic shrinkage of their top line and bottom line.
Right.
Now, that can be caused by various factors. So, the overall analysis and our methodological approach revealed that the erstwhile segmentation was one of the root causes creating that sort of a debacle, right? So that was half the battle won. Because if we would have gone in a different direction, and if the outcomes would have been misleading, then you would have been shooting in the darkness. So predominantly the diagnosis was really critical from the standpoint of addressing what needed to be addressed. And that's what I mean by converting a business objective into a full-fledged research objective, and then making sure that the data that's available are drilled and mined and navigated and went through lots of analytical interventions to come out with our desirable configuration of the segmentation and the clustering. Now to the second part of your question, very, very important. If those information are not necessarily available, I think the thought process was pretty robust. So even if we would have had slightly lesser number of attributes as well, not as rich as we were lucky to receive and leverage, still we would have come out with a pretty robust segmentation scheme. And from our standpoint, the strategy is leverage what you have at this moment and build what you need to have, right? So don't stop if you don't have. Leverage to the maximum and then create a measurement instruments to capture those information for futuristic interventions so that whether it is segmentation or any other analytical intervention, they can be refined over time as we progress.
Absolutely, that's brilliant. So I like the fact that, just like the first one, your paper and your sort of emphasis is also on going back to basics in some way, which is basically translate your business objective into research objective very, very clearly, and start with what you have, go with what you have, rather than trying to do something different. And I think that's why we felt that this sort of fits into the change maker theme quite well, because it's going on an evolutionary path. Do something little differently every day, rather than doing something dramatically different once in a while. So I think it takes us on that path brilliantly well. But thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Bikramjit and team. It was fascinating listening to you, though very, very technical, I must say, and that we really had to pay a lot of attention to what the paper was trying to say and the presentation was trying to say. But very, very interesting nevertheless. Thank you very much. I invite Himanshu back to introduce us to the third picture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the opportunity.